Der 26. Januar 1945 in Holzwihr, France. A German soldier from the 2nd Mountain Division watches from an aid station window as medics carry in the wounded. His unit had just attacked with 250 men and 6 tanks against a lone American lieutenant standing on a burning tank destroyer. The American had only a machine gun. Within an hour, the German force was cut down to 70 combat-effective soldiers. The survivors could talk of nothing else but the weapon that had stopped them. It wasn't some wonder weapon, not a technological marvel born from German labs, but a simple American machine gun, first produced in 1933. Yet this weapon, the .50 caliber M2 Browning heavy machine gun, had become the most feared piece of equipment in the American arsenal, not for its complexity, but for its brutal, relentless effectiveness. The surviving German soldiers had just witnessed one of the most legendary actions in American military history. Lieutenant Audie Murphy, wounded and alone, had climbed atop a burning M10 tank destroyer and turned its turret-mounted .50 caliber machine gun on an entire company of German infantry supported by armor. For over an hour, Murphy fired the weapon with such devastating effect that the German attack completely disintegrated. His official Medal of Honor citation, presented by Lieutenant General Alexander Patch on the 2nd of June 1945, confirmed that Murphy inflicted some 50 casualties on the attacking force. The wounds inflicted by the .50 caliber round had become terrifyingly familiar to German medics. Unlike a rifle round which might wound and allow for recovery, the .50 caliber caused catastrophic tissue damage. The massive kinetic energy transfer meant a hit to a limb often resulted in amputation. A hit to the torso was almost certainly fatal. German field hospitals near the front learned to recognize .50 caliber casualties. By the nature of their wounds, medics could do little but offer comfort and try to stabilize patients for evacuation. Many of the wounded never made it to a field hospital. The medical impact went beyond direct casualties. German units subjected to sustained .50 caliber fire suffered from psychological casualties, combat exhaustion, and unit cohesion breakdown at a higher rate than units facing conventional small arms fire. Medical officers noted that soldiers subjected to repeated .50 caliber attacks, even if not physically wounded, showed signs of severe stress and combat fatigue. The knowledge that the next burst could not be survived by taking cover, that luck, not skill, determined survival created a sense of helplessness that was significant both medically and militarily. But the battle at Holzwihr was not an isolated incident. From the beaches of Normandy to the frozen forests of the Ardennes, from the North African desert to the skies over Germany itself, German soldiers had learned to recognize and fear a particular sound, the deep, rhythmic thunder of the M2 Browning, firing at 450 to 575 rounds per minute. Each massive .50 caliber slug carried enough energy to punch through light armor, chew through concrete, and turn a human body into an unrecognizable ruin. The conversion from skepticism to horror had begun 3 years earlier. The numbers of American industrial might were about to be written not in production statistics, but in the experiences of the German soldiers who faced this weapon and lived to tell the tale. What they would discover would shatter their understanding of modern warfare and reveal a profound truth about American military doctrine. The United States had not built the most sophisticated heavy machine gun. They had created something far more dangerous. They had built the most reliable, most ubiquitous, and most psychologically devastating crew-served weapon in history. The hatred did not begin with fear, but with contempt. The 6th of September, 1943, the skies over Stuttgart, 388 B-17 flying fortresses, approached the German industrial center on the first large-scale daylight raid against the city. Luftwaffe fighter units scrambled to intercept. Among them were veterans who had shot down dozens of Allied aircraft over 2 years of combat. They were confident in their Focke-Wulf 190 seconds, each armed with 4 20mm cannons and 2 13mm machine guns. The German pilots dove in from high and head-on standard doctrine for engaging American heavy bombers. At 800 meters they opened fire. Cannons roared, shells arcing toward the lead bombers. Then something happened that forever changed the German understanding of air combat. The bombers erupted in fire, not the smoke of damaged aircraft, but the flash of muzzle blasts. Each B-17 carried 13 M2 Browning machine guns. A typical formation of 36 bombers meant 468 heavy machine guns, all firing the same 50 caliber Browning round that could reach out to 1,830 meters with lethal effect. The combined defensive fire of the formation exceeded 6,000 rounds per minute, creating a wall of steel that no fighter could safely penetrate. The German fighters felt their own aircraft shudder as 50 caliber rounds tore through wings, engine, cowlings, and canopies. They broke off their attacks, diving away with their planes trailing smoke and hydraulic fluid. The raid was costly for the Luftwaffe. 45 B-17 seconds were lost. But German fighter losses were a catastrophe for units that could no longer replace their experienced pilots. What the German pilots did not yet understand was that they were facing not just a weapon, but a philosophy of war. The Americans had solved the problem of bomber defense not with technological sophistication, but with overwhelming firepower. Each B-17G carried between 5,000 and 7,000 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition, distributed among its 13 gun positions, with some crews carrying even more than regulations allowed. Luftwaffe pilots were trained to respect 20mm and 30mm cannons because those weapons could destroy a bomber with a single, well-placed shot. They learned to fear explosive shells that detonated on impact, but the American, the 50 caliber round did not explode. It did not need to. The massive half-inch diameter, 707 grain projectile, traveling at 2,900 feet per second and carrying 12,000 foot-pounds of muzzle energy, simply punched through whatever it hit. Wings, engines, fuel tanks, pilots. By October 1943, Luftwaffe fighter units had begun to understand the true danger. Lieutenant Hinrich Wormheller, an ace with 93 victories, described the American bomber formations in a letter home, saying, "Attacking the Americans is like flying through a steel storm. You see the tracers every fifth round, and you know that for every one you see, there are 4 more you cannot see flying past. By the time you get into effective cannon range, you are already in their kill zone." The Germans adapted their tactics. They tried head-on attacks, diving from above, climbing from below, and attacking from the sides. Nothing worked consistently. The American gunners had overlapping fields of fire. If you came from the front, the nose and top turret guns opened up. From the rear, the tail and ball turret guns fired. From the sides, the waist guns fired. From above or below the ball and top turrets fired. There was no safe approach. The U.S. Army Air Forces arranged their combat box formations of 8 to 21 aircraft in 3-dimensional space, specifically to maximize these overlapping defensive fields of fire. But the real terror was not the density of fire. It was the reliability. German pilots in their Me 109 seconds or Felv 190 seconds knew their cannons were prone to jamming, especially in the cold air at high altitude. The German MG 130-113 mm machine gun was better, but it still required careful maintenance and would fail at critical moments. The American M2 Browning, by contrast, simply worked. It fired for hours on end. It worked in temperatures from -40 to over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. It kept working after taking hits from German cannon shells. It kept firing even when the barrel was glowing red from sustained use. American maintenance crews could swap out an overheated barrel in minutes, not hours, and the gun would keep on firing without a hiccup. Lieutenant Wolfgang Fischer, a Ju-88 pilot who flew bomber intercept missions over Germany, survived the war to give testimony at later Luftwaffe debriefings. His words, recorded in March 1946, captured the growing realization among German air crews. He said, "We called the American bomber formations Die Fliegenden Festungen, the flying fortresses. But what made them true fortresses was not their armor or their formation discipline, but those 50 caliber machine guns that never stopped, never jammed, and never gave us an opening. We lost so many pilots not to American fighters but to the defensive fire of the bombers. It was like flying into a meat grinder." The war on the ground told a similar story with different details. The 6th of June, 1944 Normandy, Colonel Hans von Luck commanded units of the 21st Panzer Division defending against the Allied invasion. Von Luck was no ordinary officer. He had fought at El Alamein, was a recipient of the Knight's Cross, and would later publish his famous memoirs, Panzer Commander. His division was one of the first German units to face American forces in sustained ground combat. What von Luck discovered was that American doctrine had put the Blade 50 caliber machine gun on nearly every combat vehicle. Jeeps had them, trucks had them, half-tracks had them, tanks had them on their turret roofs, tank destroyers had them, and even supply vehicles carried them for convoy protection. The Americans had achieved something the Germans never attempted. They had equipped their entire force structure with a heavy machine gun. Von Luck wrote in his memoirs about the tactical implications, saying, "We had been told that our training and tactical doctrine would overcome the American material advantage. In Normandy, I learned the truth. The Americans didn't need superior tactics. They had enough ammunition to make mistakes and still win. Their 50 caliber machine guns were on every vehicle and in every position, firing constantly. We couldn't move during the day. Any attempt to maneuver was met with immediate, overwhelming firepower. The psychological effect was as devastating as the physical casualties. The German army had built its infantry doctrine around the machine gun. The MG-34 and its successor, the MG-42, were excellent weapons. The MG-42 fired 1,200 rounds per minute, earning the nickname Hitler's buzzsaw from Allied soldiers who heard its distinctive sound. German squads carried 1,800 rounds for each machine gun and organized their tactics around supporting the machine gun team. The concept was called Einheitsmaschinengewehr, or general-purpose machine gun, which was later adopted by NATO forces because it made tactical sense. However, the Germans never imagined the scale of American 50 caliber use. A single American armored division advancing through France would have hundreds of 50 caliber machine guns mounted on its vehicles. American supply convoys used a documented alternating fire pattern. One vehicle would fire to the right, the next to the left, to cover both flanks and break up German ambushes. This tactic was especially effective against Panzerfaust teams trying to get close to American armor. American armored formations used what they called reconnaissance by fire. Instead of advancing cautiously and waiting for the enemy to reveal themselves, American units would continuously fire their 50 calories, machine guns, at any suspicious location, tree lines, farmhouses, stone walls, hedgerows. The sheer volume of fire would suppress hidden German positions or provoke them into firing back and giving away their location. This tactic, widely documented in primary sources, including Roman Jerry Moitch's tank tactics from Normandy to Lorraine, drove German soldiers crazy. German infantry veterans of the Eastern Front thought they had seen the worst of industrial warfare against the Soviets. Then they faced American firepower doctrine in France. German squad leaders who survived the fighting in Normandy and were captured as POWs described the difference in their interrogations, preserved in the records of the U.S. Army Historical Division. Against the Russians, we faced human wave attacks and artillery barrages. Against the Americans, we faced machine gun fire that never stopped. They shot at everything. They shot at nothing. They shot to keep our heads down. They shot to stop us from moving. They shot because they had endless ammunition, and we did not. After 2 weeks of fighting the Americans in the bocage, soldiers wouldn't leave their cover during the day. It wasn't cowardice. It was math. To move was to die. The M16 multiple-gun motor carriage exemplified the American philosophy of firepower in its most extreme form. This was a half-track mounting 50 calories machine guns on a powered turret, originally designed for anti-aircraft defense. The combined rate of fire was nearly 2,200 rounds per minute. American soldiers called it the meat chopper or the Kraut mower. Official reports from the 473rd Anti-Aircraft Artillery Battalion in November 1944 stated the M16's primary anti-aircraft role often became secondary, and it was instead used against infantry. By late 1944, the German Luftwaffe was largely defeated over Western Europe. American anti-aircraft units found themselves shifted to ground support operations. The M16 proved devastatingly effective against German infantry and light vehicles. During the Battle of the Bulge, when the Germans launched their last major offensive in the West from the 16th of December 1944 to the 25th of January 1945, M16 units were credited with breaking up multiple German infantry assaults simply by traversing their 4 guns across attacking formations. The German experience trying to ambush American supply convoys showed why the 50 calories was so hated. German convoy ambush doctrine called for letting the lead vehicles pass, then destroying vehicles in the middle of the column to create a roadblock, and then systematically destroying the trapped convoy. This tactic had worked effectively against British and Soviet supply lines earlier in the war, but against American convoys it failed miserably. American convoy doctrine placed 50 calories equipped vehicles at intervals throughout the column. When an ambush began, the American vehicles would immediately return fire with their players 50 cals, while other vehicles moved to flank the ambush position. The volume of return fire was so intense that German ambush parties often took heavier casualties than the convoys they were attacking. German platoon leaders who took part in convoy ambushes during the fighting in France described the evolution of German tactics and their ultimate failure in post-war interrogations. In early ambushes, the Germans positioned infantry with machine guns and Panzerfausts along the roads. The American convoys had 50 calories equipped vehicles distributed throughout. The return fire from the convoys was devastating. German units learned to ambush only single vehicles, never convoys. But single vehicles were rare. The Americans moved in strength precisely because they knew the Germans couldn't effectively attack their convoys. The alternating fire pattern used by American convoys was particularly effective. Vehicles on the right side of the road would fire to the right flank, while vehicles on the left would fire to the left. This created interlocking fields of fire that covered both sides of the road simultaneously. Germans trying to ambush from one side would find themselves under fire, not just from that side of the convoy, but from the opposite side as well. The psychological effect of being attacked from multiple directions by weapons that could penetrate cover and had a seemingly endless supply of ammunition made successful ambushes nearly impossible. American logistics units understood that the 50 calories machine gun was their primary defensive weapon. Drivers and co-drivers were all trained on the weapon. Ammunition was carried in quantities that far exceeded official allotments. Convoy commanders were authorized to engage any suspected threat with immediate and overwhelming firepower. The result was that by mid to late 1944, the Germans had largely given up trying to interdict American supply lines in areas where WWII forces had air superiority and enough ground combat power to respond to attacks. This had strategic implications that went far beyond the immediate tactical situation. The Germans in France, and later in Germany itself, could not effectively disrupt the American logistics system. American units could count on a steady resupply of ammunition, fuel, food, and equipment. This meant that American tactical planning could assume that firepower would always be available when needed. German planning, in contrast, had to account for chronic shortages of ammunition, fuel, and the certainty that whatever supplies did get through would be late and in insufficient quantities. The 50 calories machine gun was both a cause and a symptom of American logistical superiority. It was effective because American industry could produce ammunition in vast quantities. It enabled operations to continue because its reliability meant that ammunition, once delivered, would be put to effective use. German soldiers watching American tracer rounds arc across the battlefield at night understood they weren't just seeing an expenditure of ammunition, but tangible proof of an industrial capacity they could not match. Terror from the air added another dimension to the German fear of the 50 calories. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, which American pilots nicknamed the Jug, carried 8 Browning M2 machine guns in its wings. This meant a single fighter could produce a combined firepower of 4,400 rounds per minute during strafing runs. German ground troops learned to recognize the P-47's distinctive shape and the sound that heralded death. A strafing run by a flight of 4 P-47 seconds meant 32, 50 calories machine guns, converging on a target area. The planes would approach at high speed and low altitude, often with little warning. Pilots would open fire at a range of 600 to 800 meters and walk their fire across German positions, vehicles, and troop concentrations. The effect was described by survivors as a horizontal rain of steel that left nothing intact. German quartermaster sergeants who survived multiple strafing attacks during the retreat from Normandy in August 1944 described the helplessness German ground troops felt against American air power in their interrogations. First came the sound of the engines. By the time you looked up, they were already firing. The rounds hit the road, the vehicles, and the men, all at once. No cover was effective. Stone walls disintegrated. Trees were cut down. Metal was torn apart like paper. You could be behind a truck, and a moment later the truck was just gone, replaced by fragments of metal and fire. The soldiers learned to abandon their vehicles at the first sound of aircraft engines. It was better to lose the truck than the truck and the men. The P-47 proved especially effective in what American pilots called armed reconnaissance missions. Instead of being assigned specific targets, flights would patrol assigned sectors looking for targets of opportunity. Any German vehicle moving during the day was at risk. Any troop formation, any supply convoy, any artillery position, the 50 calories. Machine guns gave pilots enough ammunition to engage multiple targets on a single sortie. A pilot could strafe a convoy, climb, spot a platoon of German tanks, dive to attack them, and then strafe a crossroads on the way home. The ammunition capacity, about 425 rounds per gun, meant a total of 3,400 rounds, enough for sustained engagements. The Germans adapted by moving mostly at night and in bad weather, but this adaptation came at a high cost to operational tempo and logistics. Supplies that should have taken hours to move now took days, and reinforcements arrived late or not at all. The inability of the Luftwaffe to contest American air superiority by mid-1944 meant that German ground forces operated under the constant threat of air attack. The primary weapon delivering that threat was the Ds, 50 calories, machine gun. The combination of ground-based and air-based, 50 calories fire, created a total suppressive effect. German units could not move safely by day because of strafing attacks, and they could not move safely at night because American ground forces used reconnaissance by fire with their vehicle-mounted 50 cals to interdict roads and trails. They couldn't concentrate forces for a counterattack because American doctrine demanded an immediate assault on any detected German formation with all available firepower, including 50 calories, machine guns that could fire continuously, while other weapons were being brought to bear. This was the reality that broke German combat effectiveness on the Western Front, not a single decisive battle, not a miracle weapon, but the cumulative weight of facing an opponent whose basic heavy machine gun was present in such numbers and used so lavishly that traditional military countermeasures became meaningless. German tactical doctrine, German training, and German fighting spirit, none of it could overcome the simple mathematical reality that American forces could bring superior firepower to any point on the battlefield faster than German forces could react. A German infantry battalion attacking an American position might face 50 to 150, 50 calories machine guns, all firing continuously and all supplied with thousands of rounds. German doctrine demanded careful fire discipline to conserve ammunition, while American doctrine demanded overwhelming firepower to suppress the enemy and maintain the initiative. When these two philosophies clashed, America's material advantage proved decisive. Urban warfare revealed another dimension of the 50 calories' effectiveness. As American troops fought through French towns and German cities, the 50 calories proved invaluable for suppressing enemy positions in buildings and destroying field fortifications. Its massive round could penetrate multiple walls of typical European construction. Brick walls that could stop rifle and machine gun rounds were almost useless against the 50 calories. American tank commanders quickly learned to use their turret-mounted 50 cals to suppress upper-story windows and rooftop positions before advancing into urban areas. The technique was simple, but brutally effective. A tank would halt at a street corner, and the commander would traverse the 50 calories along the facades of buildings, firing continuously into any likely position. The sustained fire would force German defenders to keep their heads down, allowing the infantry to move up. The tank would then advance and repeat the process at the next intersection. German panzer killer teams, so effective in open country and especially dangerous in urban environments where they could engage armor at close range, were rendered ineffective by American combined arms tactics that integrated suppressive 50 calories fire. A soldier operating a Panzerfaust needed to expose himself to aim and fire the weapon. American doctrine called for continuous 50 calories fire on any suspected position. This combination made successful Panzerfaust attacks rare in situations where American forces employed proper combined arms. German company commanders who fought against the Americans in the Rhineland during the final months of the war described in post-war accounts the impossibility of effectively defending urban terrain against American tactics. German infantry would set up in upper-story rooms with good fields of fire. American tanks would approach and simply demolish the buildings with 50 calories and main gunfire. The 50 calories rounds would tear through walls and ceilings. Nowhere was safe. Soldiers would hide behind furniture or interior walls, and the rounds would still find them. The only way to survive was to abandon a position before the Americans concentrated their fire on it. But to abandon a position meant to lose ground, and there was no more ground to lose. The psychological impact of fighting in urban terrain against an enemy with functionally unlimited 50 calories ammunition was profound. German soldiers understood rationally that walls and buildings offered concealment, but not cover from 50 calories fire. Emotionally, the human need to shelter behind solid objects is overwhelming. Watching 50 calories rounds punch through yard-thick stone walls and continue through multiple rooms destroyed the psychological security that shelter normally provides. Soldiers felt exposed even when hidden, vulnerable even when protected by what would normally be considered adequate cover. This psychological erosion was cumulative. A soldier might survive one engagement, then another, but each time he witnessed 50 calories fire, destroying what should have been safe shelter. Eventually, the accumulated stress of knowing that no position was truly safe, that the Americans could and would demolish any defensive position with sustained fire, shattered combat effectiveness. Units would abandon positions without being directly assaulted because they knew American firepower would eventually make those positions untenable. The final campaigns in Germany demonstrated the total superiority of the American doctrine of firepower. The Germans fought bravely and skillfully, often achieving local tactical successes against numerically superior American forces. But tactical success meant nothing when the Americans could simply concentrate firepower and reduce German positions to rubble. The 50 calories machine gun was the foundation of this firepower. It was present in sufficient numbers to engage any target. It was reliable enough to fire continuously for hours. It was supplied with so much ammunition that American commanders never needed to conserve it, and it was employed according to a doctrine that valued suppression and destruction over conservation and precision. German tank crews learned to fear the 50 calories for different reasons. While the M2 could not penetrate the frontal armor of German medium and heavy tanks, it could damage optics, disable external equipment, and suppress accompanying infantry. More importantly, the 50 calories could penetrate the thinner side and rear armor of many German armored vehicles at combat ranges. The American M10 tank destroyer carried a 50 calories M2 HB machine gun mounted at the rear of the turret for anti-aircraft and close-in infantry defense. Statistical analysis of ammunition consumption shows that M10s fired more high-explosive than armor-piercing rounds, indicating their widespread use in an infantry support role, where the 50 calories proved critical for what crews called close-in housekeeping operations. A German panzer killer team might disable an American tank, only to be cut down by 50 calories fire from accompanying tank destroyers or infantry support vehicles before they could escape. Night combat brought another, 50 calories related terror. American ammunition was linked in a 1-to-4 ratio of tracer to ball rounds. This meant that every fifth 50 calories round was a visible tracer that marked the bullet's path for the enemy. German soldiers watching American 50 calories fire at night could see glowing streams arcing toward them, streaks that seemed to move slowly enough to track with the eye, but which arrived with terrifying speed and power. The psychological effect was profound. Soldiers could see death coming for them. They could watch the tracers converge on their position. They knew that for every tracer they saw, 4 more invisible rounds were flying down the same path. The human instinct to duck or dodge was useless, because by the time a soldier saw the tracer, the other rounds had already arrived. Veterans learned not to watch the tracers, but new soldiers would be transfixed by them, mesmerized by the deadly light show, often dying in the open as the fire found them. The Americans deliberately exploited this psychological effect. Reconnaissance by fire at night meant spraying suspected positions with streams of 50 calories. Tracers. The visual effect was overwhelming. Entire sectors would light up with crisscrossing streams of tracer fire. The sound of the guns, combined with the visual impact, created an environment German soldiers described as hell. German infantry NCOs captured near Aachen in October 1944 described the experience in interrogations. At night, you can see them shoot even when they cannot see you. They shoot at sounds, at movement, at nothing. The tracers show you where death is coming from, and you cannot escape it. You watch the streams of fire and know that for every tracer there are 4 more bullets. You do the math that one gun firing for 10 seconds sends 50 rounds your way, and only 10 are tracers. You see 10 streaks, and 40 more bullets are in the air. Then you realize it is not 1, but 5 or 10 guns firing. The math is terrifying. You cannot survive that density of fire through skill or bravery. You survive by luck alone. The Germans had their own tracers, but their doctrine of fire discipline meant they were used sparingly. A German machine gun team might fire a burst of tracers to check their aim, then switch to ball ammunition to conserve the more expensive tracer rounds. American gun teams fired mixed belts continuously. The visual effect of American fire at night was therefore far more dramatic than German fire, even when German weapons had a higher rate of fire. This visual dominance had practical effects beyond intimidation. American commanders could observe their own fire and adjust it in real time. If tracers were falling short, the gunner could see this and correct immediately. German return fire was harder to observe because they fired fewer tracers. American units therefore had better real-time feedback on their fire effectiveness, allowing them to adjust and concentrate fire more efficiently than German forces with their more conservative use of tracers. The Germans tried to develop countermeasures. They attempted to use armor more aggressively to close with American positions before the 50 calories fire became overwhelming. This rarely succeeded because American artillery and air support would engage German armor at longer ranges, forcing the Germans to fight at the exact distances where 50 calories fire was most effective. They tried infiltration tactics, moving at night and in bad weather when American observation was limited. But American logistics meant that 50 calories, ammunition was always available, and American doctrine encouraged firing on any suspected position whether a target was confirmed or not. On July 25, 1944, Operation Cobra began. The American breakout from Normandy commenced with 3,300 tons of bombs dropped by 1,800 heavy bombers on German positions near St-Lo. Major General Fritz Bayerlein commanded the Panzer Lehr Division, one of the elite German formations defending the sector. After the war, Bayerlein wrote extensively for the U.S. Army Historical Division, analyzing the campaign. His assessment of American firepower was objective and devastating. He wrote that by the time his division withdrew from the St-Lo area, it had been shattered not primarily by bombing or artillery, though those were significant factors, but by the cumulative effect of continuous small arms fire that prevented his forces from maneuvering effectively. The American, 50 calories, mounted on every vehicle, meant his troops couldn't move to counter American advances without being immediately engaged. His conclusion was that the Americans had solved the fundamental problem of modern warfare. They had figured out how to deploy superior firepower without needing superior training or tactics. Bain, promoted to Lieutenant General on the 20th of July 1944, participated in the brutal fighting of the Battle of the Bulge and finally surrendered in April 1945. His post-war writings became a primary source for understanding the German perspective on American methods of war. He noted repeatedly that the 50 calories machine guns, operated by soldiers with minimal specialized training and supplied with immense quantities of ammunition, created a baseline of firepower that German forces couldn't match with their more sophisticated weapons and better trained crews. The winter of 1944 saw the Battle of the Bulge, Germany's last major offensive on the Western Front. The Germans achieved complete tactical surprise and initial success. For the first few days, it looked like German armored forces might break through to the Meuse River and split the Allied armies. Then, American logistics reasserted itself, along with the 50 caliber machine gun. American units poured into the Ardennes with their standard issue equipment and ammunition. This meant that even temporary defensive positions could generate a terrifying volume of 50 caliber fire against German attacks. The battle became a grinding war of attrition, exactly the kind of fight that favored American material superiority. At Bastogne, surrounded American forces used their 50 caliber machine guns to devastating effect against German infantry assaults. These guns worked reliably despite the sub-freezing temperatures, mud, snow, and the general chaos of the prolonged battle. The Germans had made a critical error in their planning for the Bulge offensive. They assumed bad weather would ground the American air forces and neutralize the effectiveness of American firepower. They were half right. The weather did initially limit air operations, but German planners failed to account for the ground-based 50 caliber machine guns, which were unaffected by the weather, and that American logistics could sustain a level of ammunition consumption the Germans found incomprehensible. General Alfred Schlemm commanded the 1st Parachute Army from November 1944 until March 1945, when he was wounded during Operation Veritable, the 1st Canadian Army's push across the Rhine. Schlemm had the difficult task of defending against Allied attacks with dwindling resources and declining troop quality. His post-war analysis focused on the cumulative psychological impact of American firepower. Schlemm noted that by early 1945, German soldiers had learned to recognize the sound of an American 50 calories from a great distance. The knowledge that any position could be engaged by these weapons, that any movement could draw immediate fire, and that the Germans had no effective counter created what he called a defensive mentality, making offensive operations nearly impossible. His forces had successfully evacuated across the Rhine ahead of the final Allied offensive, but he attributed his casualties primarily to the constant attrition caused by American heavy machine gun fire during the retreat. The technical specifications of the M2 Browning help explain its effectiveness. The weapon weighed 84 pounds without its tripod, and 128 pounds with the M3 tripod. This made it quite heavy, but not unmanageable for a crew-served weapon. Its effective range of 2,000 yards could engage targets far beyond the reach of German rifles and light machine guns. The rate of fire was 450 to 575 rounds a minute, slower than the German MG-42. But a higher rate of fire meant nothing when German crews had limited ammunition. The 50 caliber Browning machine gun cartridge, fired by the M2, had specifications that made it effective against a wide variety of targets. The standard M33 ball round had a muzzle velocity of 2,910 feet per second. Armor-piercing variants could penetrate 3/4 of an inch of armor at 550 yards. The M8 armor-piercing incendiary round could penetrate 16 millimeters of armor at 500 meters and would ignite fuel or ammunition on penetration. The M20 APIT variant, with a tracer element, could penetrate 21 millimeters at the same distance. This meant that, while the 50 calories could not penetrate the front armor of a Tiger or Panther tank, it could go through the armor of half-tracks, armored cars, and the side and rear armor of many German armored vehicles. More importantly, it could destroy truck engines, puncture fuel tanks, neutralize artillery pieces, and suppress infantry at ranges where return fire was ineffective. The M2's reliability came from its design. John Browning began its development in July 1917 during World War I. The M1921 water-cooled 50 caliber machine gun, weighing about 121 pounds with its water jacket, entered service but proved too heavy for mobile warfare. The air-cooled M2 version, adopted in 1933, did away with the water cooling system and reduced weight while maintaining reliability. The weapon's basic operating principles were simple, robust, and proven. American manufacturers, including AC Spark Plug, Frigidaire, Guide Lamp, and Colt, produced nearly 2 million ACCC 50 caliber machine guns of all models during the war years. Production of the M2HB, the heavy-barreled version capable of more sustained fire, totaled about 350,000 units across all services and theaters. This scale of production meant that American forces never lacked for replacement weapons or spare parts. Intellectually, the Germans understood what they were up against. Their weapons were, in many ways, more sophisticated. The MG-34 and MG-42 were better suited for the squad automatic weapon role. Germany's 13mm MG-131 aircraft machine gun had a higher rate of fire at 900 rounds per minute. German 20mm and 30mm aircraft cannons had greater destructive power per round. But sophistication meant nothing in the face of overwhelming material superiority. The Americans had built a weapon that was good enough for every necessary role and produced it in numbers that allowed for its universal use. Every American bomber carried 13 M2s. Every fighter, like the P-47 Thunderbolt, carried 8. Every American combat vehicle carried at least 1. American infantry companies had organic, 50 caliber heavy machine gun platoons. American anti-aircraft units could repurpose their M16 quad mounts for ground combat. The weapon was everywhere, always available, always lavishly supplied with ammunition, and it worked every time it was needed. The psychological impact on the German army was cumulative and devastating. Individual soldiers could survive encounters with 50 caliber fire. Units could successfully complete tactical missions despite American firepower superiority. But over weeks and months of combat, the constant knowledge that the Americans could bring overwhelming firepower to bear on any target at any time, with weapons that worked reliably in all conditions, eroded German combat effectiveness as surely as casualties and equipment. Losses. This wasn't a matter of cowardice on the part of German soldiers. These were veteran soldiers who had fought across Europe and North Africa. Many had faced Soviet onslaughts on the Eastern Front, but there was something uniquely demoralizing about the American approach to war. The Soviets could mass seas of men and artillery. The British could demonstrate tactical and combined arms excellence, but the Americans simply deployed overwhelming material resources and fired until resistance collapsed. German officers found it increasingly difficult to motivate their soldiers to attack when they knew that American 50 caliber fire would stop any advance in its tracks. German infantry became reluctant to move during the day, and German vehicles huddled in cover instead of advancing. The tactical initiative shifted decisively to the Americans, not because of superior tactics or better training, but because the American doctrine, built on a foundation of unlimited ammunition and reliable weapons, had made German doctrine obsolete. The hatred German soldiers felt for the 50 calories was the resentment of the craftsman facing mass production, of the skilled warrior facing industrial war. The 50 calories represented everything about American warfare that the Germans found alien. The casual expenditure of ammunition, the reliance on material superiority over superior skill, and the willingness to destroy rather than capture or bypass. This was not the method of soldiers in the traditional European sense. This was the method of an industrial power that had calculated that material expenditure was cheaper than casualties and more effective than tactical finesse. After the war, military historians and former German officers offered consistent assessments. The American the 50 caliber machine gun was not the most sophisticated weapon of World War II. It wasn't the fastest firing, most accurate, lightest, or most versatile. It was simply the most effective because it combined reliability, ubiquity, and overwhelming logistical support. The weapon itself was only part of the equation. The system that produced millions of them, supplied them with billions of rounds of ammunition, and employed them under a doctrine that accepted material expenditure as the price of victory was what defeated Germany. The legacy of the M2 Browning can be measured by its continued service. 80 years after it entered production, the weapon is still in active use by the United States military and armed forces around the world. It has outlasted every weapon system it faced in World War II and has served in every American conflict from World War II to the present day. This longevity reflects the fundamental rightness of its design and the effectiveness of the American military philosophy it embodied. The broader strategic implications only became clear in hindsight. German military planning had assumed that superior training and tactical excellence could compensate for America's numerical advantages. This assumption proved to be catastrophically wrong. The 50 caliber machine gun demonstrated that good enough weapons produced in overwhelming numbers and supplied without limit defeated sophisticated weapons produced in limited numbers and supplied sparingly. German tank commanders who had outfought Soviet armor with superior tactics found themselves unable to maneuver against American combined arms teams saturated with 50 caliber machine guns. German infantry who had mastered the tactical intricacies of the MG-42 found their expertise rendered meaningless when American forces could simply saturate defensive positions with continuous 50 caliber fire. German pilots honed their skills against the Royal Air Force only to be shredded by defensive fire from bomber formations that valued quantity over precision. The lesson was universal and unforgiving. In an industrial war, the side that can sustain higher material expenditure wins regardless of tactical skill. The Germans brought a craftsman's approach to a mass production war. They optimized for efficiency when the situation demanded overwhelming force and conserved ammunition, while their opponents could spend it freely. What German soldiers learned through bitter experience was that modern industrial warfare rewards not tactical brilliance or superior training, but the ability to sustain overwhelming material expenditure. The M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun became the symbol and the instrument of that lesson. The German army brought skill, doctrine, and determination to the fight, while the American army brought an industrial system capable of producing and supplying heavy machine guns in numbers that made resistance mathematically futile. When those two approaches to war collided, the outcome was never really in doubt. The M2 Browning, the 50 caliber machine gun, became the symbol and the instrument of that lesson. The German army brought skill, doctrine, and determination to the battlefield, while the US Army brought an industrial system capable of producing and supplying heavy machine guns in such overwhelming numbers that it made any resistance hopeless. When these two methods of warfare clashed, the outcome was pretty much a done deal.